In the world of Bigfoot, there are countless reports of encounters with these undiscovered creatures that could make anyone's skin crawl. If you read or listen to some of these encounters while out in the bush next to the campfire, you're almost certainly dooming yourself to a night full of anxiety and probably minimal sleep. Bigfoot, to most people, is a subject that is fringe, funny, and something that only crazy conspiracy types only delve into. But the few of us that are passionate about the subject know and understand the one actual truth about it. People are in fact seeing and documenting these Bigfoot creatures on a regular basis, and some of these people, because of their frightening encounters, are changed forever as they struggle to escape from the residual fear that haunts them to this day. Welcome to Mountain Beast Mysteries. Hey everyone, welcome to Mountain Beast Mysteries. In today's video, I'm just going to share with you guys some very interesting, shorter Bigfoot encounters that I found online that I thought were kind of interesting and cool. And if I was in the shoes of the people that went through these incidents, I would be terrified. And, I'd question whether or not I'd be going out into the woods again alone, which is something I do on a regular basis. But anyways, before we get into that, I have a quick message from today's video's sponsor. If you struggle like I do to keep your wallet situation under control, fear no more. The Ridge Wallet is the solution to all of your manly organizational problems. The Ridge Wallet is a sleek, durable, minimalist wallet that is perfect for your everyday carry loadout. Its RFID blocking can carry up to a dozen cards and just straight up looks cool. Ditch the overflowing leather dad wallet and join us here in the 21st century with the Ridge Wallet. Get 10% off when you use the code ridge.com/mountainbeast. That's ridge.com/mountainbeast. You'll never find a better wallet and you won't be disappointed. So yeah, pick yourself up a Ridge Wallet and fill it up with all the fat stacks you're making these days, you know? Oh, and enjoy listening to these cool Bigfoot stories. My veterinarian sister, my former girlfriend, and myself had been on a road trip and had finished eating dinner at the Sizzler in Bend, Oregon, when we headed south to find a camping spot for the night. We were headed south and then west when we stumbled onto Kitson Springs, a deserted place when we arrived. We basically threw our sleeping bags on the ground and went to sleep. In no more than 10 minutes, we heard loud rustling by the spring about 20 yards away, then a series of loud stomping sounds. Then we heard a blood-curdling shrieking and howling that lasted nearly 20 minutes. If you're familiar with the Puyallup tape from 1974, this will give you an example of what we heard. We could not see the creature. I had to cover my ears and my two companions panicked, so I told them to play dead. We were scared stiff anyways. I whispered to my sister and asked if she thought it could be a cougar, which she thought was ridiculous. We suggested it sounded ape-like. The creature ran at tremendous speed up the hillside, screaming the whole way, and we heard the shrieks in the distance for at least another 10 minutes. We somehow fell asleep and awoke in the morning, not quite sure of what had been there. I found no tracks, but I had little time to look since my sister threatened to drive away without me if I didn't get in the car. How we fell asleep, I have no idea. In May or June of 1977, my wife and I decided to take a ride up the Mackenzie River from Eugene on a Sunday afternoon. After stopping at Cougar Springs, we headed up to Proxy Falls area and hiked into the Three Sisters Wilderness area about 3 miles. We had just entered a meadow about 20 yards wide and stopped to talk when we both heard something that sounded large moving through the trees just outside the clearing. We both started to listen. Whatever it was in the trees was making a low, soft grunting sound, and its footsteps were audible and heavy. It sounded like a biped. My wife asked me what it was, but I had never heard something make that sound before. I grew up about 40 miles from this spot, in the upper Santiam River area. Whatever it was completely circled us, staying in the trees twice. We were both becoming uneasy, and my wife asked me to get us out of there. We began to walk back down the trail, stopping occasionally to see if it was following us. It didn't. I don't know if this is of interest, but way back in 1970, while hiking the Pacific Crest Trail north of the Hoodoo ski area, something happened that I will never forget. I was with 3 friends on a hiking trip. When it was time to hit the sack at around 11 p.m., we all got into a small tent. All of us were in sleeping bags ready to go to sleep. Then we heard heavy footsteps. They sounded like a man walking, who, or whatever it was, circled our tent 3 times, brushing up against the tent without tripping over the ropes holding up the sides of the tent. It was very dark outside. We saw no light from a flashlight. We thought, how can a guy walk around the tent without a light? By the way, I do not think there was anyone camped within miles of us. Needless to say, this scared the heck out of us. We did not get out of the tent to look around. We were too scared. We were all only 15 years old at the time, and that's it. There's not much more to the story. But again, it's something I will never forget. Hunting in the woods, I saw what I first thought was a deer, but it turned out to be an elk, which was rare to spot in this area. Out of nowhere, it took off running. That's when I saw a large animal take off and run about 50 feet beyond the elk. It was about 300 yards from me, and I pulled my rifle up on it to see it with the scope, and I was able to follow it just long enough to see that it looked to be dark brownish with what looked to be possible moss on it. I headed over to where it was and saw what spooked both it and the elk. A group of 3 hunters were casually walking about. I asked them if they saw anything, and they said no. I told them I think I just saw Bigfoot, and then they laughed at me. I chatted with them for a couple of minutes, then walked over to the area that the Bigfoot ran. Other than just some bent grass, there was nothing until I came to the base of an old-growth tree. There looked to be a single part of a footprint. It was just the front part of the foot. It was about 3 inches deep, and the big toe looked to be about 4 times bigger than mine. I felt uneasy the entire morning. I felt as if I was being watched. I left camp alone and heavily armed. My friend and I were on an elk hunting trip. As I walked through the forest, I found myself looking back over my shoulder for no apparent reason other than feeling like I was being followed. I stopped by the creek to watch the salmon and have a bite to eat. As I was eating, I was watching a clear-cut area where the power lines ran down a ridge. This clear-cut was about 75 yards wide and was covered with light-colored grass about knee-high. I glanced down the cedar cut just as something large, dark, and upright moved across from left to right. It took this thing about 10 seconds to cross. It was about 200 yards away from me. It disappeared into the trees beyond the clear cut. I thought at first it might be another hunter, but dismissed that thought when I thought about the fact that it was all dark-colored and didn't appear to be carrying or packing anything. After it crossed, I picked up my rifle and scanned the area where I had last seen it. I saw nothing and put the rifle down and resumed eating. Moments later, I was watching the point where it had disappeared. It came back out. This time it was moving back to where it had first come from right to left. I got my scope on it as it entered the forest again. I had a 9x scope. I was able to determine it was hairy and resembled a large man. I estimate it to be at least 8 feet tall. I could not make out any facial detail. I'm sure it didn't know that I was watching it. I'm a 24-year career Army veteran. At the time, I was a staff sergeant with 12 years of service. I was trained in survival techniques and as a scout for a number of years. I could determine distance and area details better than most civilian men. This time I kept my scope on the point where I last saw it enter the woods. It came back out again, only this time it had a partner. The second creature was about half the size of the first. It looked just like the first creature, only smaller. With the big one leading, they both crossed the clear cut and disappeared into the forest. I went back to base camp and told my friend about it, and he replied with, "Well, that explains why there's not any game in the area." My friend was a retired Green Beret major. He suggested we pack up and move to a new location far from the one we were in. We made no attempt to track the creatures. I was all for leaving. Chloe had been taken by her father to his logging camp at Detroit Lake. She was sleeping in a large wooden floored tent in a room of her own. During the night, she was awakened by noise and opened the inner door to the front porch, being separated from it by a full-length screen door. She was wearing a long t-shirt. At the other end of the porch, about 15 to 20 feet away, a Sasquatch was standing in front of the open cooler door with a 20-pound piece of meat that had been brought to the camp on the preceding day clamped under its arm. The light in the cooler illuminated the creature fully, and she described it as a female with normal-sized breasts and reddish-brown short fur. She estimated its height to be about 6'6". The Sasquatch looked at her, but neither of them moved. After some seemingly considerable time, Chloe screamed, to which the Sasquatch did not react. The men in the tent began to jump out of bed, and the Sasquatch left with the meat. The men spilled out onto the porch and followed the receding figure with several flashlights. Its footprints were about 14 inches long. The food in the cooler had obviously been searched through, but was left in rather orderly condition. Previously, a bear had gotten into the same cooler and had made a mess of its contents. This happened in a large wooden floored tent with some separate rooms inhabited by loggers. One side of the tent had a full-length porch, on which stood a large cooler with its electric compressor powered by a camp generator elsewhere. I was traveling home from Bend after picking up my children, and we were about 10 miles east of Mackenzie Bridge when I saw a large creature standing beside the road on the left side. I only saw it for a few seconds, and it was perfectly still with its hands hanging down at its sides. I judged it to be well over 6 feet tall. I said, "What in the heck was that?" as we passed by. My wife was with me in the front, and she said that she didn't know. As soon as I could, I turned the car around and went back for another look, but there was nothing there to be seen. There were 3 adults and 3 children in the car, and all but the smallest child saw the creature. I know this took place many years ago, but the scene is still vivid in my mind. 20 years after this incident occurred, my wife and I were talking about it, and I mentioned it standing on the left side of the road, and she said, "The left side? The one I saw was on the right side." Chills ran down my spine when she said that. We had talked about the incident many times, but this was the first time we realized we had both seen different creatures.